Female athletes, you've been lied to. You're constantly being told that you need to train according to your menstrual cycle, and I'm here to tell you today that that is not entirely true. And I've got some fantastic news. We've got Devlin here with us who's offered to mansplain this for us as well. I'm just joking. Dev actually has a client that he's coaching and he's been having some questions on this exact topic. Dev, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Shona, so you mentioned this client of mine. She says in the last week or so she's really been feeling a little bit flat, fatigued. She did mention that she thinks it's because she started her period. I work with a bunch of female athletes, so for me trying to sort of get my knowledge around this, I've done a bit of research around it. I'm so confused because there's research to say that there's the different phases of your menstrual cycle and how to adjust your training in each of those phases. But there are other schools of thoughts to say that that's not true. I mean, we're saying it's not true. Where are we with this?
Excellent point, Dev. There's a lot of research out there that says, okay, in this phase of the menstrual cycle, do this. In this phase, take strength out. And it really can get quite overwhelming. So I think before we go into anything, let's go into the phases of the menstrual cycle, because everyone defines that differently as well. And then exactly what the science has been saying about which phase to go into. So I've got that over here for us. Generally, the menstrual cycle is broken up into 4 phases. The number of days that lasts will depend on you individually, and that can vary female to female, anywhere from 24 days up to 36 days. Some females have cycles that last up to 36 days. For the most part, the average is 28 days. So what we're talking about here specifically is a 28-day cycle. So if we break that up into phases, phase 1 of the menstrual cycle is essentially the phase where you have your period, from the day 1 of your period to the last day of your period. What's happening from a physiological point of view here is that estrogen and progesterone are generally at their lowest, and this is really where you have increased symptoms or PMS symptoms. From a training perspective, the science has said that you're at an increased risk of illness and that maybe some moderate exercise might help relieve some of those symptoms. Over here, recovery is really, really vital. Phase 2 of the menstrual cycle is from the last day of your period to ovulation. And that is really defined by that your estrogen levels are peaking. Your progesterone is still very, very low. And when we have an increase in estrogen, it's generally good feelings, right? So that's where you feel good and strong and happy. And so from a training perspective, they're saying that you adapt better to high intensity training and strength training. There's perhaps better recovery in this phase and increased energy levels. So really phase 2, kind of window for excellent training. We'll get into whether or not that is actually the case in just a little bit. Phase 3 of the menstrual cycle is from ovulation to the days just before your period. Here your estrogen levels drop as ovulation is occurring, and both estrogen and progesterone start to go higher after that, and they remain quite high. So this is a high hormone phase, all right? Here you'll have lots of ovulation symptoms. There's increase in body temperature, increase in resting and exercise heart rate. There's a lot of females report increase in bad mood or feeling quite lethargic. And so really this isn't a fun sort of phase. From a training perspective, all types of training here can be beneficial, but the research suggests that it might just take a little bit more time to recover while that progesterone is quite high. Phase 4 of the menstrual cycle is just before females start their period. In this phase, your hormones are at their lowest. So estrogen and progesterone are really low, but what that does in the body is it actually triggers an inflammation response. So it's really not a fun phase at all. This is where females will feel an increase in their PMS symptoms, really a disruption in mood. And from a training perspective, the research is suggesting, okay, well, light exercise may help with that. And because you have this increase in inflammation, your recovery might be worse. Very often disrupted sleep, and obviously stress can exacerbate those PMS symptoms. So those are really the phases and what the research has been saying. But, and let me say this, I don't know how females are going to know that their estrogen and progesterone is high. How do you measure that? And really this research has been done in a very, very poor manner. A lot of the research studies didn't even differentiate with females who are on oral contraception or not. So you can't even then postulate that, okay, well, this is what you have to be doing. So really the current research that's coming out is saying, no, not a blanket approach. You can't say that strength training must be done here. You must recover more. That is not the way forward at all.
So not the blanket approach, it really needs to be how do you respond as an athlete to your menstrual cycle, regardless of what phase you're in. It's being more individual some react differently, some have severe symptoms, some don't. I'm assuming that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And anyone who's currently telling you that you need to train to this menstrual cycle isn't evidence-based, right? So it's an individual approach. So we're not saying ignore it completely, saying train specifically to you and what's happening to you in your body. So how do we do that? I would suggest starting a diary and tracking this. Track your menstrual symptoms, track how you're feeling, track what you're doing from a training perspective, so that over time you build up trends about all of that, and you can then make changes to your training accordingly.
So for me, if I am prescribing programs, then would have to be, okay, at certain times, based on how you are reporting you feeling, how a training session might have gone, in future I can be looking at what you have tracked. So it's one of those kind of things that we can say, right, this is how you responded to that particular training session, and then assuming I need to tweak things on the fly, like if it's you're responding in this way, we need to maybe tap off on a session, go lighter session instead of intensity.
Yeah, exactly. So for your clients where she was feeling pretty like high fatigue, quite low, you could have adjusted the session to say, okay, well, instead of us doing your interval session, let's do a light recovery run or an easy run. And so we're being specific to the female physiology, but more specific to that exact female and how she is feeling. It's not to say that every month she is going to feel horrendous at that time. So if she's feeling great, don't adjust anything. Keep the training as is. But if she's feeling not great and lethargic and sore and tired, yeah, adjust it or take it out completely.
And I'm assuming just on that, it would probably be quite an acute thing in the sense that I don't have to, if she reports she's feeling flat or started a period, I don't have to go and give her a whole week off and just take it easy. I can go, well, all right, if that's today, let's move your interval session, like you said, to later in the week and just give you a lighter run today because that's how you're feeling. 2 days later, you might feel really good and we can still go hard with an interval session. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the same goes for strength training, cross training. Even if you don't have a coach, you have the ability to adjust those sessions for yourself based on how you feel, because you also have diaries and trends of how you respond to certain things.
So that's all good and well. I mean, that's training, adjusting training and that. But what happens, and this I can imagine happens a lot, how would we adjust something for someone having their period on race day? I mean, that's probably what we're working towards, and that's the biggest effect here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it happens often. And if females are on oral contraception, they will know that that's coming up. But if you don't and you have a general idea, it is a tough situation to be in. So you can, hopefully, you've figured out over time certain things that work for you. So we'll touch on it a little bit, but nutrition can contribute. Obviously, you know that if you're starting your period, you need more sleep. So you can try and control your controllables. Obviously, that's not always going to be a happy race day. Just prepare for that race day then. Make sure you have enough sanitary products with you. I know that's never fun using that in a portaloo, but just try and control for what you can. There has been some sort of work, and I'm not a medical physician, so I'd always recommend that you speak to your physician about this. But if you are on oral contraception, I know we've done that for elite athletes. I'm not sure how much I'd recommend doing this for recreational athletes, where you can adjust your period, with that oral contraception. But again, I'd rather speak to a physician about that. That's not within my scope of practice, but there are ways that we can move around that a little bit. But I guess that's just where the value of that diary comes in, because if you can manipulate how you're feeling with sleep and nutrition, then that's something that we can look at in the build up to race day. I'm
glad you kind of touched on the point around nutrition. I'm assuming nutrition is going to play a role here to some degree.
Yeah, nutrition is definitely going to play a role. And the science is a little bit out on this. Again, there's some papers that are saying, yes, definitely adjust your cycle to nutrition. In the high inflammation phase, there's some science that says, okay, well, make sure you have a lot of omega-3s, lots of fatty fish that can help with that anti-inflammatory process. But again, it's not completely convincing in the science. I have a view of just make sure that the principles of what you're doing from a nutrition perspective are sound. Good carb, good protein, anything that you're doing in training has to be sound. Something else to look at is for the females when they have times of cravings is to maybe, rather look for snacks that are complex carbohydrates and really good proteins, as opposed to, processed sugars and so on. So those aspects of nutrition can really help, but again, not that blanket approach of nutrition. And so just a reminder, you don't have to be specific phase per phase. You really just have to have sound nutritional principles, and this video is going to show you exactly how.